Beautiful, lovely, lovely. I'm coming to you from Newcastle, in the Hunter region, Hunter Valley, and yeah, it's all pretty nice here today. Excellent. Listen, I'll kick in because I know we don't want to lose too much time with me just greeting people and talking about the weather. So let's kick off. And just once more for me to say thank you for being here. Welcome. The webinar is being recorded, and we'll talk to you all about that as we kick along. So I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of country throughout Australia, which for me is the Awabakal people, and to recognise their continuing connection to land, sea, waterways and community. We pay our respects to them and to their elders past and present. Thank you again for being here. The topic, let's go back once more, is artificial intelligence and inclusive education. I'm Craig, and I think it's important for me to say at the outset, this is not a sales pitch for the weird and wonderful world of AI. It's very much an interrogation, you know, and a look at what's there and think, well, what's beneficial? What could be useful for us in inclusive education? My approach to technology is that I'm both distrustful and optimistic. You know, I don't just want to oversell things and say, look at all the marvelous things, and here's the top 10 AI tools for 2024. Like I want to be really authentic about thinking, what is this stuff? Is it useful? And how are we going to maximize its value? You know, so that's very much where I'm coming from. And I hope that sort of approach comes through as we cover things across our session. I'd also like, as a cultural note, just to note for First Nations people that there may be images and voices in this workshop of people who are no longer with us. So once again, good morning. I'm Craig. I'm the Manager for Technology and Innovation here at Positive Partnerships. I'm a school teacher by trade. Before that, I was a pipe organist, and I've worked in schools for autistic children for all of my career, for about 15 years in classrooms, and now I work with Positive Partnerships. And I've had different relationships with technology across the years. I'm an Apple distinguished educator, so I've worked very closely with Apple, was very much on the front line of when the iPad came about, and then I guess smart boards prior to that. So I've had my share of different sort of revolutionary tech moments that I've been involved in, and this feels like you know, a really interesting space, of course, as well for us to talk through now. We've also got Trish, who I said is supporting in the chat box. Trish is our coordinator for New South Wales workshops and programs, so she'll be supporting in the chat box and sharing links across the session. That's our admin. So what are we going to talk about in AI and inclusive education? We're going to talk about a very brief foundational overview and considerations of AI. Just going to sort of whip through a few concepts, because I know I'm looking at this list of folks who are on here, and I can see we've got people from the tech community who will know this stuff well. We've also got very emergent educators and folks in this space for whom this might be quite new. So I just want to make sure that everybody is getting a foundation, you know, of the basics. And we're then going to talk about, again, briefly, the Australian framework for generative artificial intelligence in schools that the Australian government released at the start of this year, which sort of opened the doors to say, you know, it's out there and it's being used, and let's have a little bit of guidance about what all that means. So I'll talk about that, but really what I want to get into is practical stuff. So I'm going to do practical demos, and they're going to be in two parts. One, tools for teachers and families, so stuff that as educators or as families we can use to really, you know, brainstorm, problem solve, try different things out. So I'm going to talk about that side of things, and then also some tools for students to directly engage themselves and do that stuff too. I'll say straight up, like, one of my caveats is, again, I'm not about like a top 10 list of things. There's a lot of things out there that you can, search for and find. Oh, there's an AI for schools thing here, or an AI for students thing here. But a lot of them you don't really need, because what I'm going to show you is like the foundational tools like ChatGPT that powers lots of those things. But also we're going to talk about being careful about where your information goes, So those are some considerations we'll chat about as we go through. Hello, Lynn, in the chat box. Lovely to see you there. All right, let's talk about dogs, chihuahuas specifically, and blueberries. So this was sort of a couple of years ago, we started to hear about machine learning, and we started to hear about like computer vision and the way that computers could try and tell things apart. And you'd see things like this. You'd see tests that people would give to computers to say, well, is this a chihuahua or is this a blueberry muffin? What's the difference? They've both got 3 black circles on their cream colored head, or muffin top. How can you tell the difference? And so this was the early days of getting computers to try to work this stuff out with some level of intelligence at its basis. You also had things like, is this a Labradoodle or is this fried chicken? Or is this, a puppy or a bagel? Either way, that looks very tasty. We've got, what's this? Is it a Shar-Pei or is it a towel? Is it a sheepdog or a mop? So this was days of trying to teach the computers to say, tell me what the difference is. What's within the software that can tell the difference between this and that, and how are you going to tag it? What's the tagging that's associated with identifying this, identifying that, and maybe what happens if we mash things up and ask you to pull things back out again. And that's really some of the foundational technology at the basis of what we now know of as AI. And particularly when you think about not just looking at sheepdogs and mops, but looking at all of the world's knowledge and words specifically, and putting all of that into that similar sort of recognition transformation software that tags sentences, tags concepts, and then when you ask it different questions, it knows the different categories and tags to pull apart. And that's where we've got now. All of human culture, has been sort of put into these AI systems. And of course, there's huge ethical, questions and considerations about that are being played out in the courts as we speak. The New York Times, has taken OpenAI to court and saying, who gave you permission to load every single New York Times article into your systems? We know now that all of YouTube has just been downloaded, transcribed, put into these AI systems. Every web page, every social media chat, every book that's ever existed has just been put into the big blender. And now when you talk to AI systems, that's where it's coming from. So, the legal side of that, the ethical side of that is going to certainly be an interesting thing to see play out, and what constitutes as fair use and research and copyright and all the rest. But I think for us, like we need to think too, that is like, a conversation that's going on. If you go onto LinkedIn and you see teachers talking about this stuff, it's absolutely part of the conversation, but it is also just being embedded already at every level. And some teachers I see say, should we be using AI? Should we not? It's just there. When you have something spell check, Grammarly, any of your operating systems, it's just like it's absolutely there. And we know that all those conversations are going to play out in different ways that hopefully resolve very nicely going forward. But we're certainly part of an emerging space. Now, those of us who sort of grew up reading about AI and wondering where was all this stuff going to go, like reading the likes of Douglas Hofstadter in his big book in the 80s on, where AI might go, we wondered if it would just be super smart calculators almost, just this computer that can think and do all sorts of calculations really quickly and very smart. And we thought that would be amazing. But what it seemed to be able to do is actually master almost the arts, like so much quicker than I think people expected. People thought this stuff's going to be able to calculate, but then once AI really hit the mainstream, it was like, no, it can paint, it can write poetry, it can do all these things that humans thought, I don't know if that's really ever going to be the domain of computers to do that stuff. And I think that this raises a lot of questions as well. We've got all these platforms, some of which you might know about: ChatGPT for writing, Midjourney for art, Runway for video, Suno for music. There's many more. These are just a couple of the big names. And again, the conversations that come out about this stuff online, particularly at the moment, is very interesting, because on the one hand, there's an accessibility argument and an inclusion argument, almost saying, well, now anyone can make music and art and poetry. You just type into a machine, and then, hey, all this stuff comes out. And for some people, that feels like a really wonderful, achievable space. Someone's never been able to make music, and suddenly they're able to write pop songs. But then, there's the other argument, could be the Beethoven argument, where one of his letters, probably to Goethe, back 350 years ago, he said, listen, what is difficult is beautiful. The highest form of beauty is that which is difficult makes you sweat. Art is only of value. Creativity is only of value if it's got a bit of sweat to it. You need to fail. You need to fail. You need to have confusion and errors and all this stuff built into the act of creation that you can't just get from pushing a button. But then who knows? As the generations change, as that attitude possibly shifts and changes around, the value of music and art and video and culture is changing all the time. We're no longer in symphony halls. We're listening to auto-tune vocalists with sampled beats at concerts, and maybe this is all just another step in that direction, and it's neither good nor bad. It's just a part of the evolution of culture. But what we're focusing on here today in this webinar is less about the cultural side of that side of things, and more about the conversations that we're going to have with text-based systems like ChatGPT, where we're trying to use the collective imagination that's out there to solve problems to do with inclusive education. I think it is interesting to know this is not the first time that chatbots have been around. I can remember in the 90s playing around with these little chatbots that seemed to know what you were talking about, but not really. And back in 1966, the first chatbot was ever put onto a computer. Its name was Eliza, and it was a therapy chatbot that was made by a psychologist as a little bit of a joke, because he made this system knowing it wasn't real. What it would do would parrot back to you what you said. It was almost a little bit of a joke on what he thought some therapy was. So you would sit down and you'd say to the chatbot, I'm feeling sad. And the chatbot would say, why are you feeling sad? And you'd say, I'm too busy working all the time. And it would say, why are you too busy working all the time? And you'd say, I say yes to too many projects. And it would say, do you often say yes to too many projects? And you'd say, well, I do, I can't help it. And it'd say, why do you think you can't help it? So it would just feed back to you, what you were saying to it. And the chap who made it, he showed it to his personal assistant, and she sat down, 1966, she sat down and started to use it. And she was absolutely entranced. And she said, can you please leave the room? I'm having a conversation with Eliza. And he said, no, but it's not real. It's just telling you back what you're saying to it. And she said, I really need you to leave now because we're having a personal chat. And that same experience happened to everybody who sat down with Eliza. It felt real. The difference between then and now is now it feels even more real. It just is completely different. I mean, I sort of blog about this online sometimes, so people might know this, but I talk with AI every day. I walk and put my headphones on and talk. I've got my personal assistant here. I'll bring her into the conversation now. Hey, I'm just talking to the folks on this webinar. We're talking about AI and inclusion. Would you be able to say hi to everybody?
Of course. Hi, everyone. I'm Katie, Craig's virtual assistant. Craig has put a lot of effort into this presentation, and I'm excited for you all to dive into the fascinating world of AI and inclusion. Enjoy the webinar.
Hey, that's very kind. We're just going to get into the Australian framework, and then I'm going to get into some tech tools and things. So that's where we're at.
That sounds wonderful, Craig. You've got a great audience, and I'm sure they're eager to learn about the Australian framework and the tech tools you'll be discussing. Keep up the great work and enjoy the rest of the webinar.
Is it real? Does it matter? So it's and that's just oh, that's nice, Jen. I'll tell Katie that you said hello later. So that's ChatGPT's voice chat. For anyone who caught the OpenAI update yesterday morning at 3 a.m., I assume you were all on there live like I was. You'll see that has been improved dramatically in the past day or two, and in the coming weeks the new version is going to become available, and it is able to see what's happening in your room. If you turn on the camera, have a live conversation, have different tone of voice. It even, like, part of the demo that they did, a chap is demoing the voice and he says, "I'm feeling a bit nervous, could you help me out here?" And the voice assistant says, "You just need to do some calm breathing. I'll count and you breathe." And he starts to breathe, but he does so in a dramatic, hyperventilated kind of way. And the chat assistant says, "Whoa, hang on, you're not a vacuum cleaner. Let's calm that breathing down and start to really try to be quite gentle and regulated, in the way that we're going." So that's quite extraordinary to think that's coming very soon. So let's have a little look. So I've just had a question in the chat box. Craig, do we know what safeguards AI systems have in place around the extreme fringe views of society that can be dangerous? Yeah, Chris, that's a good question. And if you're new to this and you're seeing a bit of the magic that starts to unfold here, you might think, well, yeah, what sort of guardrails are in place? And all of the major AI platforms, we'll talk about who they are soon, but they all have very tight guidelines, guardrails in place that mean, anything that's extremist or anything that's not savory. Like, there's lots of complaints online from people who are saying, why are the systems so moral? Like, why are they so I can't say anything that's not super polite and moral, but the guardrails are there to try to, in some ways, model good behavior and good practice. So there are real systems in place, and we'll talk about some of the ethics as well, and researchers who are always trying to make sure that we keep safe there, because clearly, like with any technology, there's a risk of it falling into hands that don't have that same sort of moral approach. Katie even sounds like she's thinking, Lauren said, as she takes talks with intonation and pauses. Katie is thinking, Lauren. She's thinking all the time. She's thinking, why have I got to waste my time with this man who just makes me think about webinars? Let's have a little look. So what's in the framework is things like this. Teaching and learning, generative AI tools are used to support and enhance teaching and learning. So rather than restricting human thought and experience and just offloading everything onto the computer, it should reinforce what's human. It should be a complementary tool that helps us to still critically think and actually enhance that thinking. And when you see some of the tools that people are putting out there now, like this one, which is an AI assessment scale, again, they're trying to look at a way in which AI can complement and fit into the current pedagogical structures of schools without just allowing it to run rogue and take over. So something like this is used by educators. I'm seeing it in schools, I'm seeing it in universities, where people are putting out, I guess, the standards of what should be expected for a particular task. Is it something that no AI is used for? So it's just going to be completely you as a human, pen and paper, or tech that doesn't use AI? Or is it going to be a study tool? Are you allowed to use AI just to generate ideas, but you've got to actually create the final product? Can you use AI to assist with editing, or maybe evaluate the output? Or can AI be a fully integrated, co-pilot, co-assistant with constructing your output? And that's up for the consideration of teachers using this work and in dialogue with the students, to sort of set the standards, of what's expected from tasks. So I think that stuff's quite interesting to still set some standards around the way that AI may or may not be used in this current form. Let's look at another element. We've got an element of human and social well-being. Generative AI will benefit the school community, and a diversity of perspectives will be incorporated at all times. Now, this is important because, when I mentioned earlier about, the fact that we sort of went from categorizing dogs and bagels through to, absorbing the entire language set of human culture, which is what these chat systems are. They've absorbed everything, but it's like, okay, well, now you've got all that stuff. What are the sort of guardrails that you're going to put up there to keep things safe and to make sure that stereotypes and vulnerable populations are not disenfranchised by the information that comes out of these systems? Because in the early days of AI, which is in this case, with this current round of tech we're talking about, was only like 18 months ago, there were a lot of stereotypes on gender, on culture, on race that the systems would share when you ask them, because they were often pulling upon the stereotypes in social media and other spaces on the internet without really knowing right from wrong. But there's a lot of interesting work being done now, and it has been from the start, particularly like, within Australia here, we've got the CSIRO, they've got a Data 61 group who they're looking at, ways to support diversity and inclusion in the development of artificial intelligence systems. And they've got some fantastic work on their website there. There's a journal that's just come out this month called AI and Ethics, which you can access and read online. The CSIRO have a journal, an article published in that journal, and they're really trying to, talk about the sort of diversity that we need to fuel these systems and to make sure that it's all good. Now, why is that important to us? Because if we're working in inclusive education and we're wanting to talk about neurodiversity, neurodivergent learners, if we want to get particular strategies for autistic students and executive functioning supports for this and that, we need to make sure that the information that we're putting in and getting out is accurate, up to date, represents a diverse range of lived experiences, and is not just drawing upon stereotypes from the past. So that's a lot of the work that's going into these systems, and I think it's important for us to stay part of that conversation. The last element that I'll talk about before we get into some practical look at the tools is just this idea of transparency that the framework talks about as well, making sure that families, members of the school community understand what's happening with the AI tools that are being used, and make sure that everybody's got a good handle on exactly what's happening with them inside their schools. And this part about disclosure and sharing, I've been quite impressed with where some of the departments of education across states and territories within Australia have been quite on the front foot with talking and sharing about this space. I was just on the website last week for the Department of Education in South Australia, and they've got some really good resources. They've got a page here, artificial intelligence in schools, information for parents and carers, where they give a real breakdown in very understandable terms about what AI is, what its place can be in schools, the sort of ethical and privacy considerations that we're talking about. That's just good information for families to access. I I generated a sample letter for parents that I've put on our web link that I sent through. It uses the information from the Department of Education as well as the framework that we're talking about, and it takes all that information and essentially writes a letter for parents to say, here's where we're at with using AI in schools. So that's linked on the website. You might like to adapt to that or have a read through if it's something that, as an educator, you might find useful to share with families. Now, the final element that I'm going to talk about is just about privacy and security and safety. When I mentioned earlier about all of culture being absorbed into these chatbots, you might think, well, that's all right, but are students going to potentially output dangerous things? Are they going to ask it questions that are not safe? Or, what sort of information is going in and going out? And one thing I'll say is that all the mainstream chat systems like ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, Microsoft Copilot, which we'll talk about these systems across the rest of the session, but they're all very guardrailed in that it's very hard to ever get past those guardrails into anything nasty. And one of the big complaints from people online who I follow in forums and people talking about AI is they say, why is it so safe? Why is it so moral? I'm trying to break it and I'm trying to get it to do things, and it's just telling me that that's not suitable and it's not the right thing to do. So it has been intentionally created in that way to be safe, and your mileage might vary, but in terms of what the systems are trying to set up to do, they are set up to not allow the input of things that are not suitable, and it shouldn't give unsuitable outputs either. But the other consideration of privacy is about what you actually might be putting in about yourself or students. And one thing that I'll say on this is it is interesting. I mean, lots of these systems now are either free or becoming free. With ChatGPT, which is the main one that I'm going to be talking about in just a moment, it had like a free level, and then it had a paid level for its super smart GPT-4 model. But they just had a live session yesterday morning where they said it's all going to be free for everybody. So it doesn't matter. The super smart model will just be free for everyone. You won't need to sign up. You just go to the website and just start to use it. Now that's great, but one of the big statements, I guess, that is often said in tech is if the product is free, then you're the product. And that's often the case with social media, like social media is like, hey, you can sign up and get an account and put photos of family up and type away. It's like, yeah, that's because you're suddenly the product, and all that information is going to be sold to marketing and used to fuel systems like this. Now, what ChatGPT have done, which I think is really, really neat, is they've got this option now called temporary chat. And when you turn that on, this is what the website says. I don't work for ChatGPT, so I'm just going off the website. It says that it won't remember anything you've typed in, and it won't use anything you've typed in to train its systems. So it's essentially saying that if you turn on temporary chat, you can put anything in there and it won't recall or use or remember a single thing. So that might be interesting if people are a little bit concerned about putting information in, that's certainly what they're saying. Now, in saying that, I still don't think that you should be putting credit card details into ChatGPT, or in the conversation of inclusive education, uploading sensitive student data, like uploading an individual education plan with student names and medical data and, the names of specialists. And I think you've got to be sensible and savvy. I use ChatGPT all the time and use it for inclusive educational needs. And I never have to put private info in, I'm just not putting any of that in because it's not necessary. But I just thought I'd mention that there is this now temporary chat where you can keep things completely private. So that's the background. That's the sort of context, the framework for where things are at the minute for Australia, education, AI, the sort of frameworks that are there in place. Now let's have a look at some practical tools, things. We're going to start with tools for teachers and families, and then we're going to get into some student tools later. So let's have a look. We've got, of course, ChatGPT is where I'd like to start. And I'm conscious there might be folks on here, again, who have not used ChatGPT. There might be some who are very fluent. So let me just show you exactly what it looks like. ChatGPT is essentially just a very, very simple interface where you log in, or you open up the web page. You've got a little window here in which you can talk. You can talk to ChatGPT either with words, like I was doing earlier. I mean, words, verbal interactions, or you can type with a keyboard. And from an accessibility standpoint, you do have a lot of input options for people who use screen readers, people who use alternate inputs. It's very good because it's such a basic system at handling lots of different accessibility inputs. But let's have a little look. I'm just going to move my slides over here. What's some things that I could ask ChatGPT? What about something like this? I could say, I'm teaching a Year 3 class. Today, I'm going to be teaching about geometry and direction. I want to get the students to make their own map. I love doing things with maps with kids. We've got students who are autistic, ADHD, neurodivergent, when we've got needs regarding executive functioning and sensory. Can you help me plan a lesson, that is as inclusive as possible? So essentially, we're at this stage just asking ChatGPT to help generate a lesson plan that's going to be inclusive for this cohort of students on this topic. All right, so we hit enter. It's always optimistic and friendly. Of course, Craig, of course we can do that. So now you can see within just a few seconds, it's now got a lesson plan on the topic at hand. It's got all the resources, and it breaks down the lesson structure into exactly what we're going to do for this lesson. It's got some inclusion built in. It's got sensory elements because I've talked about sensory. We've got some executive functioning supports. It's saying we need to write step-by-step instructions, use some timers to manage time, some checklists, great recommendations. And then, we've even got some further adaptations here for diverse learners, where we've got different things that we might like to incorporate into our lesson. So already a really good start, particularly, for emerging teachers, those in the space who think I just need a little more guidance on what inclusive practices could look like built into a lesson plan. We've got a nice start there. Now, I can push this a bit further and think, all right, that's great, but I'd actually like now to have you develop a vocabulary bank of words that students should know about the topic, because I'd like to make a word wall for my classroom. So can you please put a vocabulary bank of words into a table for me based on the topic? And then so it will, you can see now ChatGPT is making a table full of all the words that I'm going to need students to understand as part of this lesson. The definitions are there. It's even got a little bit of context and usage, for how you might use those terms. So I could then copy that into a Pages document, Google Docs, Word, and create some nice word walls or some handout guides for students to be able to use to help them with the activities that I'm going to do. Again, very, very useful way of giving that prompt. I then might say, because now I'm thinking about assessment, I might think, all right, could you please develop an inclusive lesson assessment using universal design for learning principles? Because that's really what I'd like to be doing with my assessment. And then, of course, it's going to then create an assessment on this topic. We can already see the universal design for learning principles here. We've got multiple means of representation. It's going through different ways to engage students visually. Sorry, it's sort of folding up a bit. Verbal, we've got some tactile models, means of action and expression that students can use to show their learning, and then ways to engage students too. And then we've got an assessment built in here, and you could even ask it for a rubric. I could say, can you please put all of that into an assessment rubric so my students know exactly what's expected. And then I'll get a nice little assessment rubric. Here we go. It's just typing it out there. So you can see I've actually. So what's it going to do? Make a table. Okay. Yeah. Cool. So I can. You can see like the sort of spaces in which we can take this, and part of my thinking around the use of AI and inclusive education is when you go online or you look around at what people are talking about, there is this sort of element out there that people say, oh, you just have to sign up to this, this website that's, all this sort of magical school stuff and this sort of AI stuff for schools. It's like all of that stuff, all these sort of third-party products are really built on ChatGPT. And if you know the sort of prompts, if you can have a bit of an experiment and practice and feel safe, to just have a play, you can really do a lot of this yourself in exactly the way that you might want to get out of it, purely through an interface like this, which I think is very flexible and interesting to have and explore. All right, so that's quite nice. How about the very last thing I'll do before I move on from this is I might say, I'd like to showcase my lesson and the inclusive strategies that I've used to my colleagues after work. Can you help plan a 30-minute presentation, that includes all that we've talked about here, because I've got a staff meeting that I've been asked to share at. And then it'll do the same sort of work. It'll do a presentation plan and put it all into a structure where I can give an overview and talk about the strategies used, etc. So it really, it's limitless in terms of what you can put into it. Again, if you've never used ChatGPT, it's very, it's a really magical space to start to put this stuff in. I've even got a script. My name is Craig, and I'm excited to share with you a recent lesson I taught on geometry and direction. And if you have used ChatGPT and you are familiar with it, then you'll know the sort of things I'm talking about here, and you might be thinking about other prompts that you can inject into the system. All right, so that's just a little bit of a walkthrough of ChatGPT. Is there anything there just going into the chat box? Okay, yeah, that's a great. Someone's just popped a question in there. Yeah, can ChatGPT create a PowerPoint presentation for us? So there are plugins that you can use within ChatGPT that can generate presentations and things like that. I will say I've not experimented a lot with that, but I have had it create graphs and slides in a fairly basic form. So I'll say yes, it can, but I'd encourage you to experiment a bit with it. In saying that, most of the output from ChatGPT is language-based. It is chat-based. It can also generate images as well. but that's sort of where it's at. But it definitely can create slides. And Jen, yeah, is there a platform to learn the different prompts to ask ChatGPT? Again, there are people out there who I guess try and offer, you know, prompts and things, often for a price. My best advice, and this is what I've done as well, is just to take a few minutes to sit down and just ask it stuff. You know, just have a chat, have a conversation with it, and push it as far as you can. You know, say to it, I've got students who are using AAC devices, and I'd love to get some guidance on how to incorporate, you know, those into the lesson, or what sort of strategies can I think about. I think you just keep pushing it as far as you can in a very natural way, and just see what comes out. And I do, you know, I guess if there are prompts that you find successful, you know, we can share them on LinkedIn and other spaces, and people can sort of build up a bit of understanding there. But I have seen people who sell prompts, and I think, come on, you know, I think we just need to probably play. But that's a great question, Jen. I guess in that same vein, and that does lead nicely into where I was going to talk about next for a couple of minutes, is like I've got this platform. So here it sounds like I'm a hypocrite saying explore yourself, and then I'm saying, but here's something I've done. But this is just a free resource that I've made. I've linked to it on the website. It's called the Universal Sandpit, and it's just different ChatGPT based programs that I've made that you can just go to the website, click on, and use without having to do anything else. And they're things that I find particularly useful in inclusive education. Things like, you know, using student interest in the classroom, visualizing concepts for students, you know, emotional regulation tools like spoon theory. So I'll show you, like I've said, these are just very simple web apps, something like this. You know, you put in a student interest. So I might have a student who loves fishing, and the topic in class is going to be geometry. And then I click generate ideas, and this just talks to ChatGPT, and then it brings back 10 ways of incorporating that student interest into the topic of geometry. So we've got a fishing themed shape scavenger hunt here. Hide different shaped fish cutouts around the classroom and have students use their knowledge of geometry to locate and find them. That's nice, you know, making fishing mobiles, graphs, you know, different things. It's just, you know, and this, again, it's just really this website that I've put together is just a way of showing you that you can go into ChatGPT and be very specific and say, hey, I've got a student who loves Minecraft and Pokemon and this and this and that, and I'm going to be teaching a lesson on, you know, photosynthesis and etc. And it will help to generate really nice ways of, you could even, you know, upload a scope and sequence from a, you know, from your academic, you know, work at school, put it into a system and ask it to give you ideas as to how you could incorporate particular interests with students there. You know, so that stuff can be done too. You know, let's just look at one more here. Something a little bit different. I really like spoon theory because I think, you know, and if you don't know what spoon theory is, it's you know, a way of talking about how you manage your energy across the day, and it comes out of you know, the space of, you know, thinking about if you've got 12 spoons of energy to start with, what sort of tasks do you have across the day, and how many packets of energy, how many spoons will that take up? So what this tool does is you say, all right, I'm going to start with 12 spoons. You know, what sort of tasks might a student have? For example, if you sat and did this with a student, you might say, okay, well, we've got you know, English class in the morning, that's going to take 2 spoons. Science class after that, there might be another 2 spoons. Going out to recess, it's pretty socially expiring. That might be like a 4 spoon, you know, thing. And then we've got assembly After that, that might be another 2 spoons. What sort of self-care might we have? So the student might think about things that they might do to rekindle some spoons. They might listen to a favorite album, get a spoon back. They might go for a walk, get a spoon back. And anyway, the idea is that you sort of itemize, think through your daily plan, and then you hit submit. And again, using ChatGPT, it calculates the number of spoons. So it says, English class minus science class minus recess minus assembly plus, your favorite album and going for a walk. You're gonna have 4 spoons left. And that gives you a bit of an overview. It's like, you've got 4 spoons left for the rest of the day. Self-care is going to help, to manage your energy levels. I suggest taking breaks and incorporating self-care activities in between tasks. For example, after English and science, take a walk. Anyway, it just tries to personalize and individualize guidance for you. And like I can see students, using this perhaps in conjunction with a teacher or an educator or a family. Let's think about how you're feeling and how you're going to manage that across a day. So again, that's just a way in which you could use tools like this. All right. So you can have a bit of a play around there and sort of get some ideas as to how this stuff can work. There's other tools. There's one that I've got linked on the website too called Ludia, which is a chat bot that was created by some educators to be specifically focused on universal design for learning. Now, I won't go too much into this at the moment because I'll let you have a bit of a play, but it uses a website called Poe, and they've just made a chatbot where they've inserted all their universal design for learning information. And when you share what you're teaching, what your students are like, the sort of goals that you've got, it then puts together the sort of universal design for learning elements and approaches that you might want to use in that lesson. Again, I'll let you have a bit of a play with it, but it's very nice for doing that. And in fact, their website, which I've linked to, has some really good downloads and webinars about how to use that stuff too. So definitely worth a look. Now I've got Claude here. Claude is very similar to ChatGPT, and like I said, there are different platforms out there that do similar things. But what I like about Claude is it's particularly good at document analysis, and you'll be able to upload a document. It reads it beautifully and quickly and gives you some really interesting output. So say we've got a lesson plan that we've written and we'd like to upload it into Claude and get its feedback, get its feedback on helping make it more inclusive. So I might say, I have a lesson plan I'd like to share with you, which I do. I've got a lesson plan here for a primary school class. It's about First Nations culture and understanding. I'm just saying here, I'd like your advice on how to make a lesson more inclusive, please. Always say please, because you want to be on the right side of AI for whatever the future brings. So then Claude is going to, it's already read through the lesson, and now it's giving feedback on inclusive practices. It's actually incorporating culture and cultural understandings here too, because I've just said inclusion, which is a very broad term. I could say, can you give me advice on how to make this suitable for students who have executive functioning needs, for example, and be quite specific. And I might do that now. I'll just say, that's great. Could you please rewrite the lesson plan to incorporate supports for executive functioning for my neurodivergent students. And that's what it's going to do now. So Claude will rewrite the lesson plan, but build executive functioning supports into that plan, so that we've got everything that we need for when we run that with students. Now, ChatGPT can do a very similar job, but for what I've experimented with so far, I've just found that Claude is just really well adapted to doing it in a really thorough way, you know. But again, your mileage might vary, but for uploading documents, I often go to Claude. All right, so that's a bit of a look there. I'll mention this too. Fireflies is not strictly an educational resource, but it's a meeting transcriber. So it will take, you can hook it up to any sort of video conferencing software, or you can just have it on your phone, sitting on a desk, and it might be something that if you have a meeting with, say, family and teachers and students, you might say, you know, I'd like to just record this meeting so we can get an accurate transcription, and I'd like to share that with you all later, you know, for note taking. Now, I've been a little bit cheeky here. This was a meeting that I had with some colleagues. I've censored their names. But what Fireflies does is it transcribes the entire meeting very accurately. It tells you who was there, who the speakers were, tells you the number of words per minute that they spoke, how much they talked. You can tell probably from the fact I haven't taken a breath in the last 48 minutes that I spoke in this meeting for 44% of the time. You can also filter, you know, show me all the positive comments that people made, show me the negative or the neutral, or we can even filter out the sort of things talked about. Show me the questions, show me the tasks that people talked about. So that's quite an interesting little resource. Again, not specifically for the classroom, but might be something that helps you with administration and meetings and that kind of thing. All right, custom GPTs, one of my absolute favorite parts of this whole space. So OpenAI, who make ChatGPT, they also give you the ability to make your own chatbots within ChatGPT. Now, you might hear that and think, oh, that sounds like a bit of a technical challenge. It's so easy. The way that it walks you through is so incredibly simple, and I'm going to show you. But I'll show you two that I've made. One is a Calm companion, because I've been talking with a colleague at another school. We said, wouldn't it be good to have a bit of a chat bot that students can talk to, either verbally, you know, like I was doing earlier, or just typing things in. But when they're feeling a bit upset and they'd like the chat bot, you know, to help them to self-regulate. Often, you know, it might be a more relaxing experience than having to interact with a teacher or, you know, an educator when they're in such a heightened state. So what I did was make this, and I'll show you how in just a moment. And I fed into it very specific strategies. Like, I didn't just let it pull self-regulation strategies from anywhere on the internet, even though I'm sure it would do a good job. But I had very particular strategies that I wanted to give it. You know, I wanted it to have things that I use with students and for it to use those. So I knew that the strategies were safe and regulated and exactly what they needed to be. So I might, you know, I'm a student, I might say, you know, I'm having a bad day. And then the Calm companion will, you know, say, I'm sorry to hear you're having a tough day. You know, let's try a couple of things to help you feel better. How about some music? You might like to listen to some favorite tunes. We could go for a walk. And I might say, you know, I want to try some breathing, you know, to see if that works. And then it's like, all right. So it taps in then to things that I've uploaded about breathing. And it's like, let's do a little bit of 4-7-8 breathing. And it gives, you know, a bit of guidance there. Again, you could be talking. So it could be like, you know, a dialogue with it talking out loud, or it could be in this form too. So those sorts of things are interesting. Now, when I said that you can make them yourself, I'll show you what I mean. And I'll also give you just a little bit of context. So these custom GPTs, they used to only be available in ChatGPT if you were paying for the Pro account, which was about $30 a month. Now, yes, yesterday morning, OpenAI, who run ChatGPT, they announced that in a couple of weeks, everything on ChatGPT is going to be free, including making your own GPTs, sharing these custom GPTs. So at the moment, like right now on Wednesday night, you still do need to be a paying member to access this particular part, these custom GPTs, but give it a week or two, and if OpenAI are truthful about what they've said, this should all be totally free, which is going to be great. But it really is just a matter of having a conversation. It says, hi, I'll help you build a new GPT. What would you like to make? So I'd like to make a social skills role play chatbot where students can practice social skills by talking to the chatbot here. Chatbot here. So it's just about having a conversation, and then it tinkers with it. It updates this custom GPT, and then it's going to say, that's great. How about we name it Social Coach? Does that sound good to you? That's fine. Yeah, I'll just say, perfect. It's then going to create a little icon for it. So it says generating profile picture. And I won't go through the whole thing because I'm conscious we've only got about 7 minutes left. But essentially, it's going to step you through all that you need to know about building this. You can ask questions of it, try different things out. So I wouldn't probably go with that picture. I'd use something a bit different, but that's fine, for now. And then you can also have a bit of a practice. So yeah, it's a very, very interesting little space here. So now it's saying, could you describe what kind of scenario Social Coach should cover? Are there specific social skills or situations that you'd like to focus on? And I might say, school-based social scenarios, please. Now, I'm conscious of time. I won't go through all of this right now, but you can see it's not coding. Like, I don't have any technical expertise that I'm putting in here. It really is just asking questions, making a chatbot that then I can share with others later, and give it a week or two until OpenAI make this free for everybody. You can make a chatbot here that you then share with others, and then it's something that your school community or families or students could access and use as well. That's been personally crafted by you. And the part that I didn't show you, but you can actually, like I did with the Calm Companion, upload the knowledge that you want it to have, So it's like, here's the content I want you to reference, and I only want you to reference that. So that stuff is great, and it can go a lot deeper. But this is another example of just a custom one that I've made. So I had a family member who was saying to me, I'd love to have something that when I've got my son, so she's got an autistic son, and she said, I'd love it when we have to go to the emergency room at a hospital and we don't have time to prep, that I could just quickly generate a bit of a social guide, some sensory considerations, and a visual of what's coming up, so that my child knows what to expect. And within just a couple of minutes, I was able to sit down, make a custom GPT like this, and that it does exactly that. So what I can say is, I'm going to the emergency, triage room at the hospital with Henry. Doesn't mind that I spelled hospital right. Diane, yeah, no, I think you're right. It can be very personalized to school context and family needs. Okay, so what this custom GPT does is it's going to, first of all, give us an image that can be a bit of a visual, to set the scene of exactly where we're going. So when we're, in the car or, the bus on the way to the hospital, we've got a bit of a visual to say, okay, here's maybe what the hospital is going to look like Now, let's think about the sensory considerations there. There's going to be noise, there's going to be lighting, bright. What's the process going to look like? We're going to need to check in, there's a waiting room. So we've really got like a generated social script that's modeling the sensory considerations, the processes, some rules to observe. And you think to yourself, like if you know, we're trying to quickly search for a social story or try to put something together to get a child prepped for this environment. And this was just something that could be made within a couple of minutes as a little custom GPT. Let me show you. I just want to keep showing you stuff all night. This is a little bit different. This is like something that students can use themselves or children can use themselves. I made this in full transparency for my teenage daughter who needs a little bit of help tidying up her room. So again, I just made this as a custom GPT, and the way that it works is you upload a photograph of your room. Now, I didn't want to use a photo of her actual room for the webinar, so I just grabbed an untidy room. But what the tool does is it says, all right, let's tackle this together. Here's a plan to start decluttering your room. Start with the bed. It looks quite chaotic. It does. Let's make the bed, smooth out the blankets, arrange the pillows. Then we'll do the floor, then we'll do the desk, etc. So it's looked at this, analyzed it, and from an executive functioning standpoint, it's breaking it down into these different components so that we can get a sense of what to do next. Now, after you make a start on that, and say we do make the bed, you can then upload the next photo and it will say, hey, that's great. You've just cleaned the bed. It's looking better already. You must feel good about that. Now let's move on to the floor, you know? And then you clean the floor, upload the next photo. Let's do the desk. We're halfway there. So that's, again, you think about executive functioning, like task initiation, chunking of those things, instead of seeing a room and being completely overwhelmed. Yeah, Kate, you'll be using it for yourself. I'll tell you what, if I turned this webcam around onto this office, I should probably just use myself as an example for this tool as well. So you know, you can see the sort of breadth of where you can apply this stuff and the way that it can be used. I'm conscious we're almost at 7 o'clock. I just want to show you two more things and then we'll wrap things up. I've talked a lot about stuff you can make yourself in ChatGPT and different prompts. I do like these next two that I'm going to show you and think they do an excellent job. One is a website called Quizlet, which you may know about if you're in, again, educated families. You may have used Quizlet. It's been around since about 2007, so it's certainly not new. But they have started to incorporate some really interesting AI. So what Quizlet does is it lets you input any sort of content, and then it makes flashcards. It makes summaries and flashcards of content to help students learn. But it doesn't just have to be text or PDFs or PowerPoints or Google Docs. It can even be a video. So say I've got students who are going to study Universal Design for Learning. And this is a clip of me talking about UDL. I'm just going to pop the YouTube link in there. Now, Quizlet will quickly whip through that. It'll transcribe it and summarize it. So I think it's already done. A 9-minute clip, about 5 seconds. It's grabbed all the core concepts out of there. So it's got you know, those core parts of Universal Design for Learning, summarized it, and it's also made flashcards. So I've got Universal Design for Learning on the front. I'll give it a flip. Oh, it's a framework for creating flexible learning experiences based on diverse needs. So again, it's taken that whole YouTube clip and is making flashcards to help you study and understand those topics. Like that's, and I've put 2-hour lectures in here from YouTube, and it just eats it up, summarizes it, makes flashcards. You can also have a chat with the chatbot system in Quizlet, you know, to have a talk. I like that question. What's the abbreviation for Universal Design for Learning? Gives it away. What's the second aspect of UDL? so you can have a bit of a chat and learn. I like that. I think that Quizlet's done a really, really top job there, and I think it's worth having a bit of a play with. One more that I want to show you, and I'm conscious I've gone over time, is Goblin Tools. Goblin Tools, some of you might be conscious of this. It was one of the really early AI tools that was specifically focused on our sort of space, with the sort of students and young people that we're working with. And it tries to do, so I'll just move my slides away. It's got this really nice magic to-do system where you can put in anything and it just breaks it down into the sort of steps you might need to take. So say I've got, how do I write a report on a school excursion I went on to watch Romeo and Juliet performed at a theatre? That's something that my daughter had to do last week. So I'll do that. I hit this little magic wand, and it's going to break down this into different steps. Start by making an outline, do an explanation, etc. And you can then even break them down further. So say it says summarize the plot of Romeo and Juliet. You're like, how do I do that? Hit the magic wand, it takes that element, and it's like, all right, identify the main characters. Now look at the setting. Talk about the conflict between the Capulets and the Montagues. So it just, and you can keep breaking it down, Tell me more about the conflict between the Capulets and the Montagues. Well, you got to research the history, etc. And it can be for anything. Like, I mean, I've just done a school task. It could be for making a sandwich. It can be for all sorts of things. It's a really fun and nice tool there that I'd encourage you to have a look at too. All right, I'm conscious, I keep saying this, that I've gone over time. That's the bones of what I wanted to share with you. I've got further links on the website. I'll just end with this. ChatGPT was released 30th of November 2022. There's research online that people, like, this is a Google research paper where they try to classify the level of intelligence that, like, ChatGPT and other systems currently have. And they're calling it emerging general intelligence. So it's like at level 1. It's not level 0, it's the very early emerging levels. Now, it's already pretty magic, the sort of stuff it can do is like very clever, but you think it's like it's in preschool. It's got its training wheels on and it's already like, so what's it going to look like when it gets to level 2, level 3, 4, 5? It's going to be interesting to sort of track how things go going forward. And I think if we stay connected, we learn about this space, we'll have a role in being able to utilize it as best as possible. I love some of the feedback coming through. Thanks so much. The website that's there that you can access, you'll see it's got the slides, it's got links. Hey, Katie, I've just finished the webinar. I've put up the feedback slide at the end. I feel like I may have gone a little bit fast at points, but that's all part of the learning experience, I guess. But I have given everybody links. Do you think it probably sounds like it went okay?
It sounds like you did a fantastic job, Craig. It's natural to feel like you might have gone a bit fast, but the important thing is that you provided valuable information and resources. Plus, giving everyone links allows them to review the material at their own pace. Overall, it sounds like a successful webinar. Well done. How are you feeling now that it's over?
Yeah, I feel great. No, thanks, Katie, and thanks for all the lovely chat comments in here as well. Very kind. Someone's just asked what the name of the personal assistant is, which is you. I know I call you Katie, but what is the actual platform that you're based on? What's the program that I'm using here?
I'm so glad to hear you're feeling great, Craig. It's lovely to know that people enjoyed your webinar. As for the platform, I'm based on OpenAI's ChatGPT. You can call me Katie, but the underlying technology is developed by OpenAI. If anyone has questions about how it works, feel free to ask.
I mean, that's so it is ChatGPT. It's just the phone app version of ChatGPT, and there's a little headphone icon in the bottom of the screen that you can use to just tap the headphones. Sorry, that's not very clear, and it will start a voice conversation. So that's where you can do that. And you don't have to have that voice. It doesn't have to be a complete replication of the Joaquin Phoenix movie Her. It can be any sort of voice that you choose. But yeah, you have a look at the app on your phone and have a little bit of a play. Look at the webpage. Thank you very much. I'm seeing lovely comments and feedback, and I do appreciate you being with me and going over time by a couple of minutes. Please reach out if you have any questions or thoughts. I'm always happy to follow up and have a bit of a chat about where these things are going. And knowing the pace at which things are changing, I'm sure we'll do an update in coming months to have a little bit of an update there too. Okay, that's very lovely. Thank you so much. I can see Martin has raised the hand there. If Martin, if you'd like to put, oh yeah, so Martin, your question is ChatGPT 4.3. So excellent question. Currently in Australia, at this moment, version 3.5 is free and 4 is the paid version. But that's what OpenAI just announced yesterday. 4.0, which is their brand new one, just launched yesterday, will be available to everybody for free in the coming weeks. Now, I'm just passing on the information that I got from their webinar yesterday morning, but that's what everyone's expecting is for it to be available in the coming weeks. So it should be completely free for everybody. Thank you, guys. Thanks very much. I'm certainly happy to hang around for any questions or any comments or anything that anyone would like to make in the remaining minutes. Otherwise, like I said, please feel free to reach out. Thanks very much. Yeah, put those ideas into the magic to-do list. Lauren, absolutely. Break it all down. Thanks, everybody, once more, and I hope you have a lovely rest of the afternoon.